me really take this opportunity and thank you for your kind words and warm welcome, Ms. Shamila. Let me also appreciate, the entire team of fraymedia Foundation, the leadership, the work, hard work, difficult work, and sometimes, a thankless, work that we get to embark with. Let me also appreciate the team from the Government Communication and Information System. I'm actually delighted to see this collaboration taking shape. Government it's meant to be there for the people, and under the leadership of President Mmapaseka, we get to experience, joint, collaborative, and meaningful work taking shape for our country. Let me really thank and greet, our friends and institutions that are here, including Development Agency. I do see a colleague from the United Nations that have joined this gathering. But the most important guests of this delegation, it's the women founders and entrepreneurs. It's media professionals, it's content creators, it's leaders in the media. And I really want to honor you and really appreciate the work that you're doing. But I want to start by saying and premise, my message, from what Ma'am Charlotte Maxeke has left us, and it's an instruction that she left us that remains radical more than a century later. When she said, this work is not for ourselves. Kill that spirit of self, and do not live above your people, but live with them. If you can rise, bring someone with you. Close quote. I'm starting this because there is a theory of women's empowerment in those words. Empowerment is not the private escape of few exceptional women from a structure that continues to oppress millions. It is a collective redesign of that structure so that the next women does not have to survive the same violence, exclusion, or even exhaustion. And that is why this rise and shine, breakfast matters. We may be a few, but that's enough for us to move forward. This kind of rise and shine breakfast matters because it gathers women who help society understand itself. Women in media decides with experience that enters a public memory. Women in media decide whose pain is believed and which possibilities become imaginable. In a time of disinformation, misinformation, and democratic fatigue, the question around the democratic infrastructure matters. And where is the women in that? The theme before us declares that empowered women empower the nation. We should be welcoming it. That's what we're going into Women's Month in. When we launched the Women's Month calendar with Minister Chikunga, we thought about this theme, empowered women, empower nation. But we shouldn't just take this theme and welcome it alone. We must actually interrogate it. Because if we then are going to speak about empowered women, we possibly might be just simply talking about how we talk around visibility. But does it possess power? And that's why I'm saying we must interrogate it. Does the woman we talk about have just a title without a budget, a platform without protection, a business without access to capital or procurement? Or is she praised as resilient because the country has normalized her exhaustion? So empowerment must mean the real freedom to command one's time, body, labor, income, safety, and voice. Anything less, we risk turning a revolutionary demand into a motivation or a motivational slogan. So I'm asking us to interrogate, to have clarity of why we speak about women empowerment. Now, of course, this year gives us a powerful measure. South Africa stands before 3 jubilees, and these jubilees that we are spending the year. Of course, there are many others that we are missing in this highlight of jubilees. There are much more that we can reflect in, but I want to speak about the 3, and these 3 jubilees where South Africa stands before this observation or commemoration. It's really first one which we are marking, the Platinum Jubilee, the 70th anniversary since the women of 1956 marched. We are also focusing on the Jubilee of the Youth Uprising, the young people of 1976, who some people only just want to coin as the Soweto Uprising, but we know the youth uprising happened across the country. Whether you're talking about Alexandra, Langa, Guatemala, and so forth. The youth uprising of 1976 matters. And then, of course, the most important one as well is the 30th anniversary since the adoption of our Constitution, which was adopted in 1996. These are the 3 clocks of freedom, ticking inside the same unfinished democratic project. And the first clock asks us whether the women who marched against the past laws would recognize economic freedom in the lives of their granddaughters, grandchildren, and so forth. The second asks us about the courage of young people, that young people of 1976 has become around education, work, and participation. What does it mean for young women today? And then, of course, the third clock asks whether the constitutional promise of dignity, equality, non-sexism has moved from text into the ordinary architecture of daily life. So what is this thing that we must resist? We must resist 2 dishonest temptations. The first is to pretend that democracy has delivered nothing. The second is to pretend that what it has delivered is enough. I want us to really resist these 2 dishonest temptations. We mustn't pretend that democracy has delivered nothing, and that we mustn't pretend that what it has delivered is enough. Democracy has fundamentally altered the legal and political status of women. Our Constitution has made equality and non-sexism founding values. Democratic South Africa expanded reproductive freedom, strengthened protection against domestic and sexual violence, recognized women in customary marriages, and advanced equality in employment. Women's representation in parliament rose from 33% in 2004 to 42.8% in 2024. In fact, if you were to take it an administration before, we've actually even dropped because we're at 48%. But this outcome of 2024 elections, we've dropped. Many of these parties are even giving us more men. So those scales are important. And even when you look at the National Council of Provinces, on its own, it also has reached 44%. Now, women's representation in senior public service management rose. It has rose to 45%. And we're seeing this because also the tertiary qualified women have also entered physical, mathematics and engineer fields. So that's what democracy has also delivered. Colleagues, these are not cosmetic gains. They have changed who makes the law, who interprets policy, but also who leads institutions. We dishonor the women who fought for them when we erase progress. And we raise it potentially by this very tone that we find ourselves in, fashionable cynicism. And I'm saying this because if women of 1956 organized, fought, when it was unfashionable, women of all races, black, white, colored, Indian, who stood outside the Union building, 20,000 of them came together. What's stopping us now to come together when we have democracy, constitution, and laws that allows us to even be much closer together? I just want us to interrogate. It was not fashionable. It was not acceptable for women to come together along racial lines. But now we've got laws and democracy. We still are not able to come together, united, and to fight together. I just want us to ponder 70 years later. And when Mmapaseka said to us, kill the spirit of self, I want us to stick to that in our imagination. But I also want us, while we look at progress, we must know that the center of progress coexists with the exclusion and challenges. So I want us to also be mindful of that, because women's labor force participation remains almost 10 percentage points below of that men. So while we see progress, we are also seeing this challenge. The labor force participation remains below. Women are still more likely to be unemployed. And we also know that concentration of women is piling up in the informal sector. We are seeing much more high numbers of women running small enterprises. We remain underrepresented in municipal leadership. And we also have commanding heights that we are experiencing within the private sector. Now, studies have been done. Institutions such as the Reuters Institute, women held 38% of top editorial roles in South Africa by 2025. 38%. a reminder that the entry into journalism has not automatically translated into control over editorial resources as well as institutional power. No honest account of progress can ignore even gender-based violence and femicide. A woman cannot be described as empowered if the route to work is unsafe, if the workplace disciplines her for a surviving abuse, if digital platform turns her body into a site of attack, or if the justice system makes dignity expensive and even delay normal. So we must recognize women in their full diversity. Black women and women of color, rural, township, and working class women, young and older women, women with disabilities, migrant and refugee women, domestic and care workers, women living with HIV, women within the LGBTI community, mothers and women who are not mothers, women in formal newsrooms, women in building platforms from a phone and unstable data connection. I just want us to realize women are diverse. They are not a homogeneous group. And our Constitution on its own is an intersectional document, born where race, gender, class, disability, sexuality, age, and geography meet. An agenda that sees only the women closest to power will reproduce hierarchy amongst them. This is particularly important when we speak about the care economy. Every morning, before the formal economy reports for duty, another economy is already at work. Children are fed, older persons are assisted, medication is administered, water fetched, households organized so that workers can arrive at offices, factories, schools, clinics, and newsrooms. This labor holds society together, yet much of it is unpaid, underpaid, or invisible. South African women spend more than twice as much time as men on unpaid domestic work, and nearly 7 times on much of their time on unpaid care work. We call women providers and backbone of their families, but romantic language can conceal an economic injustice. We are normalizing it day by day. We use this language every single day, but we know certainly the nation subsides women's time. So care is not a private inconvenience to be solved by individual women. We spent a little bit of time earlier talking about how much we spend working, preparing, and that is unpaid labor. We must recognize that. But on its own, when we measure it, it's an economic infrastructure. When care system fails, women leave jobs, decline assignments, postpone education, and lose income. A late editorial meeting assumes that someone else is collecting their child. A newsroom that celebrates women's leadership while ignoring her care burden has recognized talent but reorganized power. So international practice offers us a useful lesson. In Uruguay, they built a national integrated care system that treats care as a right and a shared responsibility. Its time-use data estimate unpaid care work at nearly a quarter of nation's output, with women's contributing more than twice men's share. In Canada, Canada's investment is affordable child care has reduced cost while growing the care force. Now, South Africa should not copy, mechanically. We can't do that. But the lessons is that care becomes transformable when it's measured, funded, and governed. We need a South African care compact built on 5 commitments. Recognize care, reduce its labor, redistribute it across women, also men, the state and the market itself. Reward paid care and the workers in it, because everybody deserves decent compensation. But everybody also deserves decent conditions. And then, of course, ultimately, represent care work in decision making. So if we're talking even about women in media, it's also around the decisions we make about, for, and with women in media. And that means that the women in media, we must also consider the accessible early childhood development support, support for older persons because we belong to families as well, and even persons with disabilities amongst ourselves. What transport, what support to logistic movement, mobility, what social protection, what parental leave that changes amongst ourselves, but also that changes amongst our counterparts, men in our lives. But also what gender responsive budgeting look like for women in the media. I'm raising this because we do have a policy around gender responsive budgeting. But it seems like when you look at sector by sector, because there's a serious need to tailor-make gender-responsive budgeting. We can't speak about entrepreneurship, but we only think about the industrial sector or the green sector, or we don't think about even media as an economy. But what does the gender-responsive budgeting looks like for media space, and in particular, women in the media? So how do we then interpret this policy within? So it's quite important. So media organizations, technology companies, civil society must also examine themselves. We spoke a little bit about that earlier. We have to interrogate ourselves around our policies. And beyond just the craft of infrastructure and institution, we also have to speak about the people, the women in the media. What are the flexible hours that we are working with? The safety policies around the field we are operating in. The online abuse that even the women in the media experience. It's not only us. Today you can write about us. We get the attacks, but people don't speak about the writers, the journalists, the editors, and the abuse they endure as well. The owners of media houses, the abuse they endure as well. So this really speaks to the kind of leadership pipeline that we have to look into, the redesign of the whole infrastructure that is quite necessary and important in the work that we do. But that brings me also to the issue of anti-gender movement, because here we are, we're talking about women in the media. This rise of anti-gender movement exists, and because it is impossible to discuss women, media, and democracy today without naming the organized backlash against equality. The anti-gender movement is not simply a collective of conservation or conservative opinions. It is an adaptive, transnational political infrastructure. It uses money. It uses lawfare, lobbying, religious distortions. It uses algorithms and disinformation to convert prejudice into policy. And I want us to really appreciate this understanding of the moment we are living in the geopolitics. It keeps the language of rights while emptying the rights of meaning. Equality becomes a threat. The language we've just organized ourselves with, women in the media, people will take this language as a threat. They will never look at it that we are actually still walking this journey of course-correcting injustice of the past. People will never look at it that way. But this equality that becomes a threat, we are seeing it disorganizing and undermining even bodily autonomy, becoming a disorder in the space we occupy. Feminists, human rights defenders, and journalists are cast as enemies of culture, family, and nations. So we should refuse this false choice, even in the women in media space that we are operating in, because we'll be labeled as anti-family. We oppose family notions. We are organizing different language that undermines family values. We are not anti-culture, living cultures grow through dignity, but African women have resisted domination, built economies, we must see that, and left communities and produced knowledge throughout history. And this is where we need to locate the story of women in the media, in the positive part of it, even against the backdrop of anti-gender movements. Because it's very important that we locate centuries after centuries how women have played a role, how women today are playing a role. Because if we are entrepreneurs, we are owners, we are women in the media, where are we locating ourselves even in the midst of politics, and how our bodies, our mind, our intellect have been redefined. I want to say to you that the backlash has a deliberate media strategy. The anti-movement backlash has a media strategy. It understands that if we can discredit the messenger, you can avoid answering the truth. Women journalists are targets, not only for what they report, but also for being a woman in public. I'm sure we've seen how this is playing out these days. It carries different approaches on how women in the media are attacked. We're seeing this, the UNESCO report that have also highlighted in 2026 that 45% of surveyed women journalists and media workers have been self-censored on social media as well. And we are seeing this taking place and shape within women in different spaces: black, queer, white, black, colored, women with disability, migrant women. These attacks accumulate, and they accumulate in numbers. We must also confront the forms of workplace harassment, colleagues, that are disguised as humor, that are disguised in many other ways. The remarks that we receive, the subjects that we attend into as women, all of these carry a very painful journey for women in the media. So we must be clear. There is no derogatory joke that is harmless. Humor does not neutralize humiliation. It teaches the room that women's dignity is negotiable, that her authority can be reduced to her appearance, and that her belonging depends on her willingness to tolerate contempt. So over time, these so-called small components of silence contributes to a big challenge that we deal with on a daily basis. So I'm really raising this because if our commitment is to equality, equality must interrupt the conduct, the organizing, the coordination, the support, the intended support that is transformational for women in the media. Women's safety cannot be left to individual resilience. Women's support cannot be left to corridors of those who make power and decisions on behalf of women. Women must have ownership. Women must have leadership. Women must have control. And we must be unapologetic about how we locate the leadership, the support, the budget, because I'm also sure that all of us, the work we do must be financed. When we went into G20, the priority for our department included the care policy, which I've touched, but it also included the reality that we deal with, its access to financing and markets. So all of this is quite important. But it means that even in the work that you do, what have we integrated around women's role in the media? The issues around digital security, the issues around psychosocial support and legal support play center. How do we anchor the work that you do around law enforcement? That must also understand the technological facilitated challenges that we are facing every day. Beyond private sector or private institutions we are part of, how do we really deal with the anchoring support and contribution by civil society and government for that matter? So we do need to really focus on all these issues. But government must therefore support media without scripting media. Public communication procurement should be transparent, fair, and accessible to community, independent, and women-owned media enterprises. Payments must be prompt, on time. Public data should be open, usable, and available in our languages. We must support, for digital transformation. We know where we all come from. We know how the world is also transitioning in different spaces. There used to be an everyday effort where we used to walk across to a spaza shop or a supermarket to buy a newspaper. People no longer walk that much, or buy newspaper for that matter. So newspaper is here. Comes in a digital form. It's on the phone. It pops. So how are we also looking at this support around digital transformation? Colleagues, we are not going to run away from technology. It's here. So with the expertise, with the talent, how do we then respond to the changing world? Last year when we had Youth Month, we spoke about the skills, necessary skills for the changing world. So that we don't actually speak about young people entering specific fields, but we are not actually responding to this changing world. So I'm also going to really push and ask ourselves as women in the media, how are we responding to this changing world? The audience development. I'm also talking about the audience that actually read news, media. It's also changing. Gone are the days, where we know how much our elders trained us. I used to actually say to people that my grandmother from my paternal side, every day I came back from school, if I had to watch TV then, anyway, there were very few stations. We didn't have those options. So if you had that, SABC 1, 2, and 3, that was it. But every single day of my life, I watched the news in every language from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock. There was absolutely nothing else. If a channel was changing, I was changing to a different news language. And by the way, it was the same news, but just delivered in different language. So I'm just saying, the audience now is different. Our children are not subjected to that. They actually even walk around with iPads. I don't even know what they are watching. The audience is changing. So in the time where we still talk about the importance of women in the media, we do not need to neglect the audience development. It's quite important that we incorporate this around the work that we are doing. And no journalist should have to exchange also independence for survival. Because currently, the workforce, the ownership has now turned into a survival mode. So I want us to really look at the media sector that must move beyond counting women to share power, who owns the platform, who controls the budget, who commissions the investigation, who benefits from intellectual property, who is promoted after carrying invisible labor of mentoring and workplace care, representation without ownership that can become inequality on its own. So there are models from which we can learn from. I've spoken earlier about other countries, but also India has got a particular lesson for that matter, that demonstrate how women, particularly in the rural communities, report in their local language and they are compensated fairly. Because sometimes compensation doesn't come fair. But what they've done in India was to also set up community trust. And I remember when you said to me the issues around pricing and so forth, people determine that. But when you set up trusts, foundations that also can safeguard the compensation, but also that can build on journalism, that will take us forward, and India has done so. But here at home, we see other institutions like Bekisisa, who have done that, and they've shown how specialized public interest journalism can combine rigorous evidence, syndication, newsletters, convening, and training. I think it's also a case that we need to learn from. And these examples reminds us that sustainability does not come from chasing, virality alone. It grows from trust, it grows from utility, from community, it multiplies revenue streams and the courage to know one's public. So that's the task before us. Women in media, we must become radical. We must never stop, but we must also become practical. That is necessary. So how are we going to reorganize ourselves? And let's not be hard. If 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, something worked then, it's okay in 2026 to reorganize ourselves, coordinate ourselves, and better the environment we are operating in. We must build the economy of which we are operating in. We must also build an information economy, because women in the media controls, designs, and builds the information economy. That must be fairly compensated, that must belong into institution, that must be shaped by technology, but that must also receive the fair share of public and commercial value to it. And we must also build a democratic defense. We too, as women in the media, have got a responsibility to contribute to the democratic project. And that democratic project includes how we defend democracy against movements such as anti-gender movements, anti-rights movement, and anti-democratic movement. Colleagues, those movements are well organized, they are evidence-based, they are well-financed, and they are intergenerational, but they are also unapologetic on what they do. So we too must be radical and practical in the manner we organize ourselves. I want to really close off by saying, colleagues, the women of 1956 teaches us that injustice retreats when women organize. The youth of 1976 teaches us that domination fears a generation that can name its conditions. The Constitution of 1996 teaches us that freedom must be institutionalized if it is to survive beyond the memory of its victory. These three jubilees, therefore, ask us this one question: what will our generation add to the inheritance? So if you are the women in the media now, when Charlotte Maxeke said, when you rise, bring someone with you, what will they inherit in this space of women in the media? So let it be said that we refuse to praise women for carrying a nation that will not share the load. Let it be said that we defended the truth when organized falsehood tried to silence women. Let it be said that we moved from visibility to ownership, from representation to redistribution, and from policy promises to lived freedom. And let us return to those words and instructions by Mam Charlotte Maxeke. May every woman who's rising in the media bring her strong self, but also bring a younger woman seeking an opportunity, a younger woman from the rural community, storytelling in their own language. Let's not ignore that language. Let's bring a woman with disability whose insight has been excluded. Let's bring a queer woman targeted for telling the truth. Let's bring a care worker whose labor makes every other profession possible. Let's bring a community whose story has been treated as national news. We have a task, and our task is to rise, not as individuals in our different corners. Our target is to rise together. Let's do it in a structural manner. Let's do it collectively, seeing each other's contribution, because that's what democracy demands of us. Let us ensure that women in media don't just speak about freedom, but they live it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.